Morning sunlight entered through the large glass windows of the mansion. Shining over the polished marble floors, Rosa, the maid, moved quietly with a bucket in one hand and a cloth in the other. She had worked in this house for years, always careful, always respectful, never leaving a mark behind. Her life was simple, but inside her heart lived a deep love for her only son, Leo. Leo was a quiet 12-year-old boy with soft brown hair and eyes that carried both sadness and curiosity. Every morning he came with his mother to the mansion, waiting for her in the servants' quarters while she cleaned. He never complained, never asked for toys or sweets. Instead, he sat by the door listening to the sounds from upstairs, the elegant sound of the piano. The piano room belonged to Madame Evelyn, the millionaire's wife. She was known for her beauty, her expensive jewelry, and her sharp tongue. Every afternoon she would play the piano in the grand hall, her fingers moving quickly across the keys. The sound was powerful but cold. It was like music made for applause. Not for the heart. Leo loved the piano, but he had never touched one. His father, who died when Leo was little, used to be a street musician. Rosa often told stories of how Leo's father played songs that made people stop and smile. Maybe that was why Leo felt something special every time he heard a melody. He didn't just listen, he felt every note in his soul. One quiet afternoon when Rosa was scrubbing the floor in the hallway, Leo wandered a little closer to the grand hall. Through the half-open door, he saw Madame Evelyn sitting at the piano, her long fingers dancing across the keys. He stood there in silence, completely lost in the music. Suddenly, Evelyn stopped playing and turned around. Her sharp blue eyes caught him standing there. She frowned. "What are you doing here, boy?" Her voice cold and proud. Leo froze, his heart pounding. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered. "I just wanted to listen." Evelyn gave a small laugh. Not a kind one, but the kind that hurts. "Listen?" She repeated. "Do you even know what you're listening to?" "This is classical music, not some street song." Rosa rushed in at that moment, her face pale. "I'm so sorry." "Madame Evelyn," she said quickly, "he didn't mean to disturb you. He's just a child." But Evelyn waved her hand, annoyed. "Then teach your child some manners." "Rosa," she said sharply, "he shouldn't be wandering around the house like a stray cat. Especially not near my piano." Leo looked down. Embarrassed, his small hands trembled. He wanted to say he wasn't trying to be rude. He just loved the music, but the words stuck in his throat. Rosa placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "Let's go, Leo," and they quietly walked back to the servants' room. Later that evening, when the house grew quiet and the sound of footsteps disappeared, Rosa sat with Leo by the small window. The moonlight fell on his face. "You shouldn't have gone near her, my love," she said softly. "People like Madame Evelyn, they don't understand us. They live in a different world." Leo didn't answer right away. He looked out at the stars and finally said, "Mama, do you think if I learned to play I could make music like her? Or maybe even better?" Rosa smiled sadly. "Your father would have said yes," she whispered. "He believed music comes from the heart, not from rich fingers." That night, as Rosa fell asleep, Leo stayed awake. His mind was full of melodies. He could still hear the sound of Evelyn's piano, but in his imagination he changed it, made it softer, warmer, filled with feeling. The next day, Leo helped his mother clean the hall again. This time he stood farther from the piano, afraid of being seen, but when Rosa wasn't looking, he reached out and touched one of the keys. Just for a second, the soft note filled the room, and it felt like magic under his fingertips. He smiled, quickly pulling his hand back before anyone could see. But that one note stayed with him all day. Madame Evelyn noticed the boy again later. She watched him while pretending to read a magazine. There was something in his eyes she couldn't understand, a kind of quiet strength. She didn't like it. It reminded her of the people she used to look down on before she married her rich husband. She turned to Rosa and said, "You should keep your boy away from my piano." "Rosa, he looks at it like it belongs to him and it doesn't." Rosa lowered her head. "Yes, madam," she said quietly. But inside, her heart ached. She knew her son wasn't like other children. He didn't dream of toys or sweets. He dreamed of music that night when they left the mansion. Leo stopped at the big gate and looked back at the house. The windows of the piano room glowed softly in the dark. "One day, Mama," he said quietly, "I'll play that piano, and I'll make you proud." Rosa looked at him and smiled through her tiredness. "I already am, my son," she whispered. The city lights flickered behind them as they walked home. Neither of them knew that the piano inside that house would soon change their lives forever. But in Leo's small heart, a spark had already been born. The spark of a dream that would fight against pride, wealth, and fate itself. The night was quiet, and the air inside the mansion felt heavy after everyone had gone to sleep. Rosa was finishing her last round of cleaning in the hall, her back aching from a long day. Leo sat nearby, his small hands folded on his knees. His eyes kept moving toward the grand piano that stood at the center of the room like a shining moon. When Rosa stepped out to bring a new bucket of water, Leo slowly stood up. His bare feet made no sound on the marble floor. He walked toward the piano as if something invisible was pulling him closer. The golden light from the chandelier reflected on the smooth surface, and for a moment he could see his reflection, a small boy with big dreams. He gently pressed one key. The sound was soft, warm, alive, then another and another. Soon his hands began to move, uncertain at first, then with growing courage. He played a melody he remembered from his father, a song his mother used to hum while cooking. The tune filled the empty mansion. It was not perfect, but it carried something pure, something that reached beyond skill. It was the kind of music that speaks without words. Rosa returned and froze at the doorway. Her eyes widened as she watched her son sitting at the piano. Completely lost in the sound, she wanted to stop him, afraid of what Madame Evelyn might do if she found out. But the music, it was too beautiful. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered softly, "Oh, Leo, you're just like your father." But at that very moment, another figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Madame Evelyn. She had been unable to sleep, annoyed by what she thought was a noise from downstairs. Her expression hardened as she saw the boy sitting at her piano. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice sliced through the air like a blade. Leo jumped, his hands freezing above the keys. Rosa rushed forward. "Madam, please, he didn't mean—" Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply. "Didn't mean? He's touching my piano. The one that costs more than your entire life," she snapped. Her voice echoed through the hall. "Who do you think you are, boy? You think you can play like me?" Leo's lips trembled. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered. "I didn't want to harm it, I just wanted to play a song for my mother." "For your mother?" Evelyn laughed coldly. "How sweet the maid's son wants to perform in my house. How amusing." Rosa lowered her head. "Please, madam, forgive him, he's just a child." "He won't touch it again." Evelyn crossed her arms, staring at Leo. "Children should know their place." "Rosa," she said, "he's not here to dream. He's here because you clean my floors." Leo bit his lip. His small fists clenched at his sides. He didn't speak, but his silence carried more pride than fear. Evelyn didn't like that look in his eyes. It reminded her of people who refused to bow. "Get him out of my sight," she said sharply. Turning away, Rosa took Leo's hand, her voice trembling. "Come." "Leo." As they walked away, Leo looked back once, his eyes fixed on the piano, his heart heavy, his dream bruised. That night, Rosa cried quietly in her room. "You shouldn't have done that." "My love," she whispered, "she's powerful. She can take everything away from us." Leo sat beside her, his voice small but steady. "Mama, I didn't mean to make her angry. I just wanted to hear the piano up close when I play. I feel like I'm talking to Papa." Rosa held him close, tears falling on his hair. "Your father would be proud of you, Leo. But this world doesn't listen to hearts, it listens to money." Leo didn't reply. He looked out the window at the moon and whispered softly, "Then one day I'll make them listen to me." The next morning, the mansion felt different. The servants whispered quietly. They had all heard what happened. Some smiled kindly at Leo. Others looked at him with pity. When Madame Evelyn entered the hall, her heels echoing on the floor, everyone froze. She pretended not to notice them, but her thoughts were restless. The sound she heard last night, it had something special, something she couldn't explain. Later that day, as she practiced on her piano, she found herself thinking of that little boy. She pressed the same keys he touched. The melody that came from her fingers felt empty, mechanical. She frowned and stopped, angry at herself for even comparing. Downstairs, Leo continued helping his mother, sweeping the floor and dusting the tables. But his eyes always found the piano whenever they passed by the hall. By afternoon, fate played another trick, Mr. Harold. The millionaire husband came home early. He was kind and calm, Unlike his wife, as he walked through the hall, he saw Leo wiping the piano legs carefully. "Be careful with that, son," Harold said kindly. "That piano is precious." "Yes, sir," Leo replied, smiling shyly. Harold paused, noticing something in the boy's eyes. "Do you play?" he asked. Leo looked down. "A little, sir, but Madame Evelyn doesn't like it when I do." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why is that?" Before Leo could answer, Evelyn's voice floated down from the stairs. "Because it's not a toy for servants, Harold," she said sharply. "You should know better than to encourage him." But Harold only smiled. "Then perhaps I'd like to hear what kind of toy it is in his hands," he said softly. Looking at Leo, "Go ahead, play something." Evelyn's face stiffened. "Harold," she began, but he raised his hand gently to stop her. Leo's heart raced, his palms were sweaty, but he sat down at the piano, his fingers trembling slightly. He closed his eyes and began to play. The sound that came was soft, innocent, and full of emotion. Each note floated through the air like a whisper from the past. The servants peeked from behind the doors. Harold stood still, listening, completely moved. When the music stopped, silence filled the hall. Harold smiled warmly. "That was beautiful," he said. "You have a gift." "Boy." Evelyn turned away, her jaw tight. Her pride burned inside her chest. Rosa, who had been standing nearby, covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filled with tears. From that day, the balance of the mansion began to shift. The boy who wasn't supposed to touch the piano had just played his way into the heart of the master of the house. And Madame Evelyn knew she had just been challenged by the very child she once called worthless. The morning sun rose gently over the mansion, painting golden light on the long windows and white walls. Harold sat at the breakfast table reading his newspaper, but his mind wasn't on the words. It kept drifting back to the sound he'd heard the night before, that soft and emotional piano tune played by the Maid's son. He had heard many great musicians perform in his life, but that sound, that innocent melody full of raw feeling, it was different. It didn't come from skill or training, it came from something purer, something that couldn't be bought. Evelyn sat across from him, sipping her coffee with perfect posture, pretending to ignore him. Her diamond earrings sparkled under the light. She looked elegant, proud, distant, without looking up from his newspaper. Harold said casually, "That boy, Leo, he plays well." The cup stopped midway to Evelyn's lips, her eyes hardened. "That boy?" she repeated. "You mean the maid's son?" "He was only pressing random keys, Harold. Don't tell me you're impressed by a servant's child." Harold folded his paper slowly and looked at her. "I heard something special," he said. "It wasn't just sound, it was feeling." "You can't teach that." Evelyn laughed lightly, but her tone was sharp. "Feeling doesn't make a musician, Harold. Money and training do," he smiled softly. "Maybe you've forgotten how you started, Evelyn. You once played for passion, too. Before you started caring about applause." Her face froze. She didn't like being reminded of her past, the days before she married him, when she played in small cafes and dreamed of wealth. Harold stood up, placing his napkin on the table. "Invite Rosa to bring her boy to the hall after lunch," he said firmly. "I want to hear him again." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I won't have that boy near my piano," but Harold's tone left no room for argument. "It's my piano too," he said calmly, "and I want to hear him play." Evelyn didn't answer. She only smiled politely, but inside her anger burned like fire. After lunch, Rosa stood nervously near the grand hall, wiping her hands on her apron. Leo stood beside her, his heart pounding. Harold sat by the fireplace, smiling kindly. "Come, boy," he said gently. "Sit at the piano. Play whatever you like." Leo nodded, his small hands trembling. He sat down and pressed the keys softly. The melody began slow and shy, then slowly grew louder, more confident. The tune was full of warmth, longing, and hope. It told a story of dreams that refused to die. Harold closed his eyes, listening deeply. Every note seemed to touch something inside him. When the song ended, he clapped softly. "You're remarkable, Leo," he said warmly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Leo looked down. "My father, sir, he used to play at small cafes before he passed away. I remember his songs." Rosa wiped a tear quietly. Proud and heartbroken at the same time, Evelyn, who had been standing at the doorway watching, crossed her arms. Her face was calm, but her heart was full of jealousy and disbelief. "Harold, darling," she said with a forced smile, "surely you don't think this child is a musician?" He's just repeating sounds he heard, but Harold shook his head. No, Evelyn, he's doing more than that. He feels the music. I've seen many trained pianists fail to play with such soul. Evelyn walked closer, her heels clicking against the marble. So, what are you planning to do? Turn our mansion into a music school for servants? She asked mockingly. Harold sighed. You always think in classes. Evelyn, I'm talking about talent. Not bloodlines. Leo looked between them, nervous, unsure what to do. Then Evelyn smiled. That kind of smile that hides poison. Fine, she said sweetly. If you believe in his talent, let's make it interesting. Harold frowned slightly. What do you mean? Evelyn turned to Leo, her voice smooth and cruel. If you can play one of my compositions without a single mistake, I'll adopt you, she said, pausing dramatically. But if you fail, you and your mother will never step foot in this house again. Rosa gasped. Madam, that's not fair. Evelyn ignored her. Do you accept, boy? She asked, staring at Leo with a challenging smile. Leo looked at his mother. Her eyes were full of fear. She shook her head slightly, whispering, No, Leo, don't. Please. But Leo stood up straight, his voice small but firm. I accept, he said. If I play it right, you'll keep your promise? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Of course, she said, pretending to sound amused. But remember, no mistakes. Harold's expression darkened. Evelyn, this isn't a game, he said quietly. You're making this cruel. But Evelyn just smiled. Life is cruel, Harold. I'm only teaching him early. That night, Rosa held her son tightly. Why did you say yes, Leo? She whispered, her eyes full of tears. What if you fail? She'll throw us out. Leo looked up at her, determination burning in his eyes. I won't fail, Mama, he said softly. I heard her music when she practiced. I remember the sound, every note. I'll learn it. Even if I have to stay up all night, Rosa touched his face. You're too young for such big dreams, she said. Leo smiled sadly. Dreams don't have an age. Mama, in her room upstairs, Evelyn sat by her vanity mirror, removing her jewelry slowly. Her reflection looked calm, but her thoughts were not. Why did that boy's music sound so real? She wondered. Why did it make me feel something I haven't felt in years? She shook her head angrily, telling herself, it's just luck, he'll fail, and then I'll never have to hear his name again. But deep inside, beneath her pride and bitterness, something small began to stir. A quiet, unwanted curiosity. Downstairs, Leo sat at the piano. The moonlight spilling over his tiny fingers, he pressed each key slowly, repeating the melody he remembered Evelyn playing. His mother sat beside him, half asleep but watching with love and fear. Note by note, mistake by mistake, he learned. His hands were small, but his heart was big. Every time he failed, he whispered again and started over. The sound of his soft music floated through the night, climbing the stairs, slipping under the doors, and reaching the restless heart of the woman who didn't believe in him. And though no one knew it yet, this small, stubborn boy had just begun a battle that would change all their lives forever. The morning came quietly, but inside the mansion, tension moved like a whisper through every hallway. The servants spoke in hushed voices. Everyone knew about Madame Evelyn's challenge. Some pitied the boy. Others were sure he wouldn't dare to try. After all, no one ever won against Madame Evelyn. Not even her pride in the small servant room. Rosa was trying to pack her things. Her hands trembled as she folded their few clothes. We should leave before she embarrasses us more, she said softly. I can find work in another house. We don't need to stay here. But Leo sat by the window. Looking out toward the garden, his eyes were calm. Too calm for a child, Mama. I'm not running away, he said. I said yes. And I'll keep my word. Rosa turned sharply. Leo, she set a trap for you. You can't win. She wants to humiliate you. Leo looked at her, his small hands clenched. Then I'll let my music speak for me, he whispered. If I play from my heart, maybe she'll hear something she forgot long ago. Rosa sighed, tears in her eyes. Your heart is too kind for this cruel world, she murmured. Upstairs, Madame Evelyn was practicing her song. It was her own composition, Winter Rain. A piece famous among her guests, it was fast, emotional, and complex. Full of sudden highs and deep lows, she played it perfectly, her fingers gliding like wind across the keys. When she finished, she smirked slightly. Let's see if that little dreamer can copy this, she said under her breath. Her maid, Clara, who stood nearby, dared to speak softly. Madam, the boy plays beautifully too. I heard him last night practicing. Evelyn's eyes turned cold. And what did you hear? A street song? she said sharply. Talent without discipline is nothing. The world doesn't reward feelings, Clara. It rewards perfection. But as she walked away from the piano, her hands trembled slightly. She didn't know why, but she kept remembering the sound of that child's playing. Pure, simple, and real. That evening, the mansion came alive. The grand hall was decorated for the dinner party. Important guests filled the room, men in black suits. Women in glittering gowns. They talked, laughed, and drank expensive wine. Evelyn loved nights like this. It was her stage, her audience. She smiled confidently as she greeted her guests. Tonight, she said elegantly, you'll witness something special. A little challenge. A bit of fun. Mr. Harold looked uneasy. He leaned toward her and whispered, Evelyn, don't do this. You're turning music into cruelty. But she simply smiled. Cruelty? Oh no, darling, I'm teaching lessons. When Leo entered the hall, the room grew quiet. He looked small among the grand chandeliers and tall guests. His clothes were simple, his shoes slightly torn, but his eyes carried a strange calmness. Rosa stood near the doorway, her hands pressed together in silent prayer. Evelyn gestured gracefully toward the piano. Well, little prodigy, she said with a sweet but poisonous smile. Are you ready to show us your miracle? Leo nodded. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, and sat at the piano. The room buzzed with whispers. The guests smiled. Thinking this was just a child's game, no one expected anything more. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. Play Winter Rain, she said, if you can. Leo placed his fingers on the keys. His heart beat so fast he thought everyone could hear it. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began. At first, his hands shook. The melody came out soft and uneven, but then something changed. He remembered his father's words. Music is not about the notes. It's about the soul between them. He slowed down. Let the sound flow naturally. Each note began to shine like drops of rain. Soft yet powerful. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It was his, not a copy, but a rebirth. The guests stopped whispering. The air grew heavy. Every note pulled at their hearts, bringing memories of love, pain, and lost dreams. Even Evelyn, for a brief second, forgot to breathe. The sound reached inside her like a forgotten echo. When the last note faded, silence filled the hall, then someone clapped, followed by another and another. Soon the entire room was applauding. Rosa covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. Leo turned to Evelyn. Did I play it right, ma'am? He asked softly. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Her pride screamed to say no, but her heart was shaking. Before she could speak, Harold stood up. You didn't just play it right, he said warmly. You made it better. The guests nodded in agreement, murmuring words like amazing, gifted, unbelievable. Evelyn's face tightened. She forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed her anger and disbelief. How touching, she said dryly. Perhaps even a broken clock is right twice a day. The guests fell silent, feeling the sting of her words. Leo didn't reply. He simply stood up, bowed politely, and said, Thank you for letting me play. He turned toward his mother. His small hand found hers, and together, they began to walk toward the door. Harold's voice stopped them. Wait, he said. The challenge had a promise, didn't it? Evelyn froze, her throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to escape, but all eyes were on her. She forced a laugh. Oh, Harold, it was only a game, she said weakly. But Harold's expression hardened. A promise is not a game, he said. And that boy won fair and square. The guests murmured in agreement. Evelyn's pride shattered under the weight of their stares. Rosa turned to Harold, her voice shaking. Sir, please. We don't want trouble. Just let us leave, but Harold shook his head. No, Rosa, he said. Your son deserves better than this. Evelyn stood silently, her fingers gripping her chair. Her heart was pounding with something new, not anger, not hatred, but a strange, painful feeling she hadn't felt in years. That night, after the guests left, Evelyn sat alone in the dark hall. Her fingers traced the piano keys. The melody of Winter Rain still echoed in her mind, but now it sounded different. Softer, more human, she whispered to herself. How did that boy do it? How did he make me feel again? And for the first time in many years, Madame Evelyn wept. Not out of pride or fear, but because a poor boy's music had reached the part of her soul she thought was long dead. The night of the grand challenge arrived like a storm dressed in silk and perfume. The mansion glowed with light. Chandeliers glittered like stars. and the air smelled of roses and expensive wine. Madame Evelyn had spared no expense. The ballroom shone brighter than ever, as if she wanted the world to see her victory even before it happened. Rosa stood near the back, her heart beating fast. She held Leo's small hand tightly. "You don't have to do this." "My son," she whispered, "let's just go home." "Please," but Leo shook his head, his voice soft yet firm. "Mama, I made a promise. I have to try." His eyes carried no fear, only calm determination. Guests began arriving. Elegant men with silver hair and proud smiles. Women wrapped in glittering gowns. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and classical music filled the hall to everyone. It was just another evening of entertainment, a show. But to Leo, it was everything. When Evelyn entered, all eyes turned to her. She wore a long crimson gown and diamonds that sparkled like ice. Her beauty was cold, perfect, and distant. She smiled as she greeted her guests, pretending nothing troubled her heart. But deep inside, something uneasy twisted within her, a faint echo of the boy's music that refused to leave her mind. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, standing by the piano, her voice charming and confident, "tonight we have something unusual, a little experiment. My maid son claims he can play my most difficult piece, Winter Rain, and I, out of kindness, have given him the chance to prove it." A wave of laughter moved through the guests. Some whispered things like, "How amusing? A child pianist? How cute?" Evelyn's lips curved into a satisfied smile. She wanted everyone to watch the boy fail. Harold stood quietly in the corner, his expression unreadable, but his eyes followed Leo. He saw something in the boy, not fear, not pride, but quiet fire. Leo stepped forward, wearing his cleanest shirt, though it was still worn at the sleeves, his shoes scuffed, his hair neatly combed by Rosa's trembling hands. He looked small next to the grand piano, like a sparrow standing before a storm. Evelyn turned toward him, her voice smooth as silk. "The stage is yours, boy. Impress us." Leo bowed politely, then sat at the piano. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. The room fell into silence, every whisper fading. The chandelier lights reflected in his eyes like tiny flames. He took a deep breath, remembering his mother's face, his father's melody, the long nights practicing by moonlight. And then he began to play. The first notes came slow, hesitant, like the first drops of rain. Then the melody grew, flowing smoother, stronger. Each sound touched something inside the listeners, a sadness, a longing, a memory of something they'd forgotten. His hands moved faster now, his body swaying with the rhythm. The song no longer belonged to Evelyn. It was alive in his hands, wild and emotional. His fingers danced like raindrops on glass, soft but unstoppable. The guests leaned forward. Mesmerized, they had expected noise, mistakes, childish clumsiness. Instead, they heard something that made their hearts ache. Rosa stood frozen, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son, her little boy, was filling the mansion with beauty. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her painted smile fading little by little. She recognized every note of her own composition, yet it sounded new, better. It had feeling, warmth, pain, things she had never allowed herself to express. When Leo reached the final section, the music slowed. The notes fell like raindrops turning into snow, soft and heartbreaking. The room felt heavy with silence. Everyone forgot where they were. They weren't in a mansion anymore, and they were inside the song. And then with one last gentle touch, Leo ended. The last note floated in the air like a sigh, then silence, complete and deep. For a few seconds, no one moved, not even Evelyn. Then, from the corner, Harold began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, the guests joined in. The sound of applause filling the hall like thunder. "Bravo!" Someone shouted. "Magnificent!" cried another. Rosa covered her face, crying openly now. The boy had done it. He had turned their laughter into admiration. Evelyn sat frozen, her face pale. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair. She felt something strange rising in her chest. Not anger, but something softer. Something she didn't want to name. Harold walked up to Leo, smiling proudly. "You've done something wonderful, son," he said. "That wasn't just music, and that was heart." Leo looked up shyly. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "I just wanted to make my mother proud." The crowd erupted again with applause, but Evelyn couldn't stand it any longer. She rose to her feet, forcing a cold laugh. "How dramatic," she said. "A touching little story." But this is not real talent, it's luck, nothing more. The room went silent. Her words cut through the warmth like ice. Harold turned to her slowly, his voice calm but firm. Evelyn, don't ruin this moment. The boy played better than anyone expected, even you. Her eyes flashed. Don't tell me what to think, she said sharply. He's still a maid's son. No amount of sound can change that. Leo looked down, his fingers still resting on the piano. His heart hurt, but he didn't speak. Rosa stepped forward quietly, her voice trembling. Madam, my son didn't play for wealth or for your piano. He played because music lives in his heart, something money cannot buy. For a brief moment, Evelyn's eyes met Rosa's, and in that look, something cracked. A tiny wall inside her began to fall, but she quickly turned away. Enough, she said coldly. The show is over. Harold looked at Leo and Rosa, his voice gentle but full of promise. Don't worry, he said. This is just the beginning. As Leo and his mother left the hall, the guests whispered among themselves. The boy's name was already spreading like fire through their words. Upstairs, long after everyone had gone, Evelyn sat alone at the piano. She touched the keys, pressing them softly, trying to play her song again, but it didn't sound the same. It felt empty now, hollow, without life. She stopped, her hands shaking, and for the first time she whispered to herself. Maybe I was wrong. The boy's melody echoed in her mind, gentle, haunting, unforgettable, and though she would never admit it aloud, Madame Evelyn knew that something had changed inside her forever. The morning after the performance was quiet, yet the mansion felt different, as if the walls themselves were still carrying the sound of Leo's music. The servants whispered softly as they worked, their eyes filled with wonder and pride. For the first time, someone had stood up to Madame Evelyn, not with words, but with heart. Rosa was in the kitchen early, packing their few belongings into a small bag. Her hands trembled as she folded Leo's clothes. She knew they couldn't stay. We've already angered her too much, she whispered to herself. Before she changes her mind, we must leave. But Leo sat by the window, his eyes dreamy and far away. Mama, I didn't play to win, he said quietly. I just wanted her to feel something, maybe. Maybe she did. Rosa looked at him sadly. Feeling doesn't feed us, my son, she said softly. We can't live on music. Before she could say more, the door opened and one of the servants entered. Madame Evelyn's husband wants to see you both in the study, she said, her voice respectful. Rosa's heart stopped. See us? Why? The maid shrugged. I don't know, but he didn't sound angry. Leo looked up, his eyes bright. Maybe he liked the song, he said. A small smile forming, Rosa took a deep breath, straightened Leo's shirt and walked with him down the long hall. Her steps echoed softly against the marble. Every painting on the wall seemed to watch them. When they entered the study, Mr. Harold was sitting by the fireplace. His expression was warm. Rosa, Leo, he said kindly, please sit. Evelyn was standing by the window, her back turned. She didn't say a word. Harold smiled at Leo. You played beautifully last night, he said. I've heard many musicians, but none made me feel the way you did. Thank you, sir, Leo said shyly. My father taught me to play from the heart. Harold nodded. Your father must have been a good man. Rosa's voice trembled as she spoke. He was, sir. He was a pianist too. He played in small cafes until he passed away. She looked down, remembering those days of laughter and struggle. Harold's face softened. Now I understand. The gift runs in your blood, he said gently. Leo has a rare talent, Rosa. I want to help him. Rosa looked shocked. Help him, sir? Yes, Harold said. I want to sponsor his education. Give him real lessons, a real piano, a real future. Tears filled Rosa's eyes. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. But before she could finish, Evelyn turned around sharply, her face pale but proud. Enough, she said coldly. You're acting as if this boy is some kind of prodigy. Harold frowned. You heard him play, Evelyn. You felt it too. She laughed bitterly. Felt it? Don't be ridiculous. It was nothing but childish luck. He'll forget the keys in a week. Leo lowered his eyes. Hurt, Rosa reached for his hand, whispering, Don't listen. My love. Harold stood, his voice calm but firm. Evelyn, last night you made a promise. The whole room heard it. You said you'd adopt him if he played your song right. Evelyn froze, her eyes wide for a moment before she quickly looked away. It was a joke, Harold, you know that. But Harold shook his head. It wasn't a joke to him, he said quietly. You humiliated a child in front of strangers, and still he showed grace. You should be ashamed. The room fell silent. Rosa tried to speak. Sir, please don't fight because of us. Harold looked at her, his voice softening. I'm not fighting, Rosa. I'm standing for what's right. Evelyn clenched her fists. Her pride cracked. You think I should adopt a servant's son? She hissed. Bring him into my home as if he were my own? Harold's eyes met hers. Maybe if you did, you'd remember what love feels like, he said gently. For a moment, Evelyn's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She turned away, her voice quiet but cold. Do whatever you want, Harold. I don't care. She walked out of the room, her footsteps sharp and quick when the door closed. Harold sighed deeply. Forgive her, Rosa, he said softly. Her pride is heavier than her heart. Rosa looked down. Unsure what to say, Harold knelt beside Leo, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have a gift, son, he said warmly. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for it. I'll take care of your lessons. We'll find the best teacher. Leo's eyes shone with tears. Thank you, sir, I won't waste it, upstairs. Evelyn stood alone by the window, watching the garden below. She could see Leo and Rosa leaving the study, the sunlight falling gently on them. Her chest tightened in a strange way she didn't understand. She remembered the way Leo's small hands had moved over her piano, the way his music had filled the room. She remembered the faces of her guests, how they cried, how they looked at her, not as the star, but as the jealous one. She clenched her jaw, whispering to herself, why can't I forget that sound? Her reflection in the window looked tired, older, lonelier. For years she had believed that money made her untouchable. But last night, a poor boy's song had broken through every wall she built around her heart. A knock came at the door. Clara, her maid, entered quietly. Madam, are you all right? She asked softly. Evelyn turned, forcing a smile. Of course I'm fine, she said. I just have a headache, but after Clara left, Evelyn sat at her piano, pressing one key slowly. The note echoed in the empty room. She tried to play Winter Rain, but the sound felt hollow. Lifeless, she stopped midway, her hands trembling in her mind. She could still hear Leo's version, softer, warmer, full of life. She placed her hand over her chest, whispering, How can a boy from nothing make me feel everything? Her tears fell silently onto the piano keys for the first time in years. Madame Evelyn realized that she wasn't angry at Leo. She was angry at herself for forgetting the meaning of music and the meaning of love. Downstairs, Rosa and Leo walked out of the mansion together. The sunlight touched their faces and the heavy air behind them felt lighter. Rosa looked at her son, smiling proudly through tears. Your music changed something, Leo, she said softly. Maybe even her. Leo nodded quietly. Maybe one day, Mama, he whispered. She'll understand what music means. And as they stepped out through the iron gates, the sound of a single piano note drifted faintly from upstairs, trembling, hesitant but full of something new. For the first time it wasn't cold, it was human. The days after the challenge passed like a soft wind through the mansion, gentle but filled with change. Nothing looked different, but everyone felt it. The servants whispered less, Madame Evelyn spoke little, and Leo's music still floated in their memories like perfume that refused to fade. Rosa continued her chores quietly, yet she could sense something coming, something she had both feared and hoped for each morning. She looked at Leo as he helped her polish the floor or carry laundry. His hands, small and rough, always found rhythm in everything he touched. In the clink of dishes, in the swish of the broom, even in silence. One afternoon, Harold called Rosa and Leo to the garden. The sky was golden with sunset, and the scent of flowers filled the air. Rosa, he said kindly, I've spoken with the music academy. They've agreed to take Leo as a student. I'll cover everything, lessons, books, even a piano for him to practice. Rosa's heart stopped for a moment. She smiled, but her eyes filled with tears. Sir, that's too much kindness. I don't know how to thank you. Harold smiled warmly. You don't need to. Just promise me one thing. Let him grow where he belongs. Leo stood still, the words echoing in his head. Grow where he belongs. He looked up at his mother, his eyes shining but uncertain. Mama, does that mean I'll have to leave? Rosa looked at him for a long moment. Her throat tightened. Maybe for a while. My love, she whispered, if this is your dream, you must go where it takes you. Leo shook his head quickly. I don't want to leave you, Mama. Harold watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt their moment. Rosa knelt down and held Leo's face in her hands. Listen to me, she said softly. All my life, I've worked so you could have more than I did. I don't want you to spend your life cleaning floors like me. You were born for music, Leo, not for dust. Leo's lips trembled. But I can't play without you, Mama. Rosa smiled through her tears. Then play for me wherever you go and I'll always hear you. Her words broke something inside her, but she hid her pain behind a smile. She knew letting him go was the hardest kind of love. That night the mansion was quiet again. Evelyn sat by her piano, her hands resting on the keys. She hadn't played in days every time she tried. Her mind filled with the image of that boy, the maid's son, sitting where she once sat, playing her song better than she ever could. She sighed, whispering to herself, what have I become? For years she had built her world from pride and reputation, from gold and applause, but none of it felt real anymore. All the jewels, the dresses, the polite smiles, they suddenly seemed small compared to one thing she no longer had. Truth, she pressed a key gently, and for the first time the sound came out soft, human, uncertain. The door creaked open. Harold entered quietly. He looked at her for a moment, then said, he's leaving tomorrow, you know. Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the piano keys. He'll have a scholarship, Harold continued. The academy will train him. He could be something great one day. Still, she said nothing. Finally, Harold sighed. You saw what his music did to people, Evelyn. Don't let your pride blind you from something beautiful. When he left, Evelyn sat alone. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. Her eyes began to sting, and she whispered to the empty room, why can't I be happy for him? Then softly, as if carried by the wind, she heard faint music from the servants' quarters. Leo was playing one last song before leaving. The notes were quiet but full of emotion. They drifted through the halls. Wrapping around her heart, she closed her eyes, and tears rolled down her cheeks. He's saying goodbye, she whispered. The next morning, the sky was pale and full of mist. Rosa stood at the gates with Leo, a small bag in her hand. Harold waited beside a black car that would take them to the train station. Rosa hugged Leo tightly, refusing to let go. Her tears fell onto his hair. Promise me one thing, Leo, she said softly. No matter how far you go, no matter how high you rise, never forget where you came from, never forget the songs of your heart. Leo nodded, his own eyes wet. I promise. Mama, she kissed his forehead. Then go, my little musician. The world is waiting for you. As he walked toward the car, she stood there watching, her body trembling. The car door closed, and her world suddenly felt quiet and empty. Evelyn watched everything from her balcony. Her heart twisted at the sight of Rosa crying. Something in that love reminded her of a younger version of herself. Before the money, before the pride, before the loneliness, without thinking, she walked downstairs, her heels clicking softly. When Rosa turned, Evelyn stood there silently for a moment. Then she said in a low voice, He's talented, Rosa. You should be proud. Rosa wiped her eyes. I am, madam, she said quietly. More than words can say. Evelyn hesitated, then asked, You'll be alone now? Rosa smiled weakly. A mother is never truly alone. His music will find me. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence between them was heavy, yet not hateful anymore. It was full of something unspoken. Respect, understanding, maybe even sorrow. Finally, Evelyn said softly, If he ever needs anything, tell him my doors are open. Rosa looked at her in surprise, but there was sincerity in Evelyn's voice. She nodded gratefully. Thank you, madam. Evelyn gave a small nod and turned back toward the house. But as she walked away, her eyes glistened. That night, Rosa sat alone in her small room. Her hands rested on her lap, and the silence around her felt too big, too quiet. But then, she smiled faintly because in her mind she could still hear it. The sound of Leo's piano, rising softly through the air, reaching even the farthest corners of her heart. At the same time, miles away on a train heading toward the city, Leo looked out the window, the countryside rushing by. He placed his small fingers on the glass and began to hum the tune of Winter Rain, the song that had changed everything. For both mother and son, that melody became their bridge, one playing it in dreams, the other chasing it toward destiny. And far behind in the great mansion, Madame Evelyn sat at her piano, pressing a key that trembled like her heart. For the first time, she didn't play for pride. She played for forgiveness, and in her music, Rosa's tears and Leo's love quietly lived on. Years passed like pages turning in a beautiful, quiet book. The mansion that once echoed with tension now stood calm and graceful, time softening its corners. The garden bloomed brighter, the halls felt warmer. Yet one thing never left: the memory of a small boy who had once played the piano like he was born to speak through music. Rosa still worked in the same house, though her hair had turned silver around the edges. She moved slower now, but her heart carried the same rhythm of love. Every morning before sunrise, she would stop by the old piano in the grand hall, run her hand along the keys and whisper, "He'll come back one day." And far away in the city, Leo had indeed grown. He was no longer the shy little boy with trembling fingers. He was now Leo Rosenthal, a name whispered in music schools and concert halls. His posters decorated the walls of theaters. His eyes still carried warmth. His heart still carried his mother. And his music, it still carried truth. On a spring morning, Leo stood on a grand stage. Rows of people watching in silence. The lights dimmed, and the audience leaned forward waiting. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody that filled the hall wasn't just music. It was memory. It was the sound of childhood, of a small dusty room, of a mother's voice singing softly at night. It was the echo of dreams that had survived every cruel word, every hungry night, every tear. When the final note faded, the hall erupted into applause. People stood clapping, cheering, shouting his name. But Leo only smiled softly and whispered to himself, "For you, Mama." That night after the concert, he sat alone by the window of his hotel, the city lights shining below in his hands. He held an old photograph, his mother standing by the mansion gate. Her smile proud and tired, he turned it over, where in faded ink were the words she had written years ago. "Play from the heart, and the world will listen." He closed his eyes, and a thought came to him like a melody he couldn't ignore. "It's time to go home," he said quietly a few days later. A black car stopped in front of the same mansion that once rejected him. Rosa was polishing the staircase when she heard the sound of the door opening. She turned, and then for a second her world stopped. There he was, tall, confident, with a gentle smile that looked so much like his father's. "Leo?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, his eyes wet. "I told you I'd come back." "Mama!" The duster fell from her hand as she ran to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "My boy, my beautiful boy," she cried. "You came back to me." They stood there, crying and laughing at once. Her tears soaked his shoulder. His hands held her like he'd never let go again. From the staircase, Evelyn watched quietly. Her face was older now, lined with years of pride and regret. She had heard about him many times, the prodigy who played from the soul. She had even attended one of his performances secretly, hiding in the back row, but she never had the courage to speak. Until now, she stepped down slowly, her heels echoing across the marble floor. Rosa noticed her and stepped aside, wiping her tears. "Madam," she said softly, "look who's come home." Evelyn's eyes softened as she looked at Leo. "So you really did it," she said quietly. "You became what you were meant to be." Leo nodded politely. "Because of what happened here," he said gently. "Because your challenge made me stronger." She let out a small laugh, sad and sincere. "I never thought those cruel words would help anyone," she whispered. "But perhaps life has strange ways of teaching lessons." Rosa smiled faintly. "Music changes people, madam. It changed him. And maybe it changed you too." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "It did," she said softly. "It took me years to understand that what I tried to crush was the very thing I had lost. Love. I had forgotten how to feel." She looked at Leo. "When you played that night, I envied you. Not because of your talent, but because you played with your heart. I hadn't done that in years." For a moment, the three stood together in silence. The proud woman, the loving mother, and the boy who became their bridge. Then Leo said, "There's something I came to do." He walked to the grand piano, the same one that once shamed him. His fingers touched the keys gently. Reverently, he pressed one note, then another. And soon the melody began, and soft, warm, full of peace. Rosa sat down on the couch. Tears already falling, Evelyn stood by the piano, her hand trembling slightly as the music surrounded her. It wasn't winter rain this time. It was a new song, one Leo had written for this moment. A song called Home. The notes rose and fell like whispers between past and present. Like forgiveness wrapped in sound, every note spoke without words. I forgive you. I remember you. I love you. Evelyn's tears fell silently. She placed her hand on Leo's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for bringing music back to this house." When the song ended, Rosa stood and hugged her son again. Her voice shook as she said, "Your father would have been so proud." Leo smiled. "He's with us, Mama. Every time I play," Evelyn looked at them, the maid and her son, the two people she once thought unworthy. And for the first time in years, she felt small in a good way, humble, grateful, human. Months later, the mansion became a place of music once again, not of pride or wealth, but of heart. Evelyn opened a small school for underprivileged children, teaching them piano and voice. She called it the Winter Rain Foundation. Rosa worked there, helping the children and caring for the house. And Leo visited often, performing, teaching, laughing. The same boy who once wasn't allowed to touch the piano now taught others to play it with love. Every evening as the sun went down, Evelyn would sit at the window, listening to the children practice below. Sometimes Leo played with them, and she would smile through quiet tears, whispering,